Hi there, folks. So, the subtitle of our podcast, it's called A Journey into Modern Day Parenting. And yes, it's about parenting, but it's also very much a journey for us as clinicians. If you haven't listened to our first podcast, we talk about how the purpose of this podcast is not for us to give answers. It is for us to find answers. And I can say with zero doubt that this journey has and truly continues to improve the way we approach teaching children here at our clinic. It has just been such a blessing to be able to talk with various professionals so that we can better serve the families that we see here on a regular basis. This podcast that you're about to hear is certainly no exception. Already yesterday, we put some of these things that we learned from the podcast and put it into action with one of our wildest group of boys. They're a wonderful group of boys, but we do struggle to keep them focused, and we sometimes run into behavior issues. But yesterday, we put some of these things that we learned from this podcast into action, and seriously, the results were immediately observable. It was really so great to watch. And so just listen up. This interview is so rich and so full of amazing, helpful information for families that I barely know where to start. I'm certain that any of you with even a mild interest in childhood development and really just human development in general will get so much out of this interview. It's so packed with great information that I think you'll likely want to listen to it more than once. I know that I have. So our guest today is a man named Vince Gowman, and he's a registered counselor who works in Canada. And so, yes, he's a counselor, but you'll find that he does so much more. He's also a healer, a speaker, an author, a poet, a musician, and a singer-songwriter. So he wears all kinds of hats. And he puts on these great things that he calls playshops, which are workshops for people, especially early childhood educators. And the goal of these workshops or playshops is to help people remember the magic of play. So you'll hear us talk about these amazing playshops during the podcast. We came to find out about those a little bit later. But the reason that we found him and contacted him was due to an article that he wrote that went far and wide. It's had hundreds of thousands of shares from his website. It's called "The Right Brain Develops First: Why Play is the Foundation for Academic Learning." And this really, as you might imagine, very much interested us because that's what we do all day long is we play with kids. And so we'll be linking to this article so you can read it in the description of our podcast. But essentially what the article talks about is how the first 7 to 8 years of a child's life are spent in a right brain frame of mind, if you will, while the adult world expects children to learn and thrive in a very much left brain frame of mind. And we'll get into this in detail, but essentially how he puts it in the article is, while the left brain is more interested in outcomes or product, the right brain cares much more about the process. The journey is what matters, not the destination. And that's very hard for us as adults to realize that the journey is teaching us also, probably more than the outcome. So what can we do as parents to have a deeper understanding of what exactly this means when it comes to your child's emotional, social, and academic development? We'll do a deep dive into this during the interview with Vince, and then we talk about so much more. We also find ourselves talking about how trauma affects children and how it affects you as a parent. And we'll talk about how trauma can find us before we even learn to talk, and in some cases before we're even born. And there's a fascinating part of the interview where he talks about how trauma can actually be passed down through our genes through multiple generations. And then, of course, we'll talk about things that we can do to start the healing process of these so we can be more available for our children. Then we'll go on to discuss deeper meanings of actually famous stories such as Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Harry Potter, Alice in Wonderland, and how these stories represent transitions from our right brain thinking to living in the more adult-centered, left brain dominant world. That's an interesting part of the interview. We'll also talk about the long and rather upsetting history of the development of our education system. The list just goes on. So much more that I know you'll find fascinating. At the end of all of it, though, this interview brings so much hope and understanding to what we can do to better ourselves as parents and as educators. And hopefully it will give all of you, I know it did us, a better understanding of the world that our children are growing up in. It's a very different world. So make sure to check out the links associated with this podcast because you'll find links to classes he provides, books, wonderful videos, and so much more. So get comfy and get ready to go on a fascinating ride because it's time to chat.
Hi, I'm Tanya Friend, and I've been a speech and language pathologist for 13 years. I am also the owner and director of Chatterbox Speech Therapy, a speech therapy practice that serves the children and community in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And I'm Corey Walker. I've been working with children for nearly 20 years, and I was a pioneering app developer in the area of speech and language pathology. We all have gifts in this life, and mine is knowing what makes children tick. Parenting in the modern age comes with uncharted challenges. We'll be bringing you discussions with experts in childhood development and introducing some tough questions and topics.
Together, with our experience and knowledge, we have created this podcast to help you with your child's development and wellness. So, listen up.
Because it's time to chat.
And so just to give you a basis of why we contacted you, we started, so we have quite the wait list here of children who need speech and language services. And we think that it's getting worse and worse, correct?
Yeah.
And so the wait list is so long that we had to decide we had to do something to get messages out to parents so they could start doing things with their children to help them at home. So, a lot of what we do isn't rocket science, but we do need the parents to know so they can start working and playing with their children a little bit more. And when I ran across your article, it seems like that article went pretty far and wide. Do you know which one I'm referring to?
Yep. The right brain develops first. Why play is the foundation for academic learning. Yeah, it's been published multiple times, and it's been shared from Facebook alone, from my website, almost 400,000 times at this point, which honestly is mind-boggling to me. I would have imagined that when I first wrote it. Yeah.
So we wanted to, I wanted to just get a lot more information from you regarding that article. And have other of your articles been as popular?
Well, nowhere near that amount, but definitely I can tell you the articles that have also been well received, and I'd be happy to list them for you. But one that I would recommend is called Connection Precedes Learning and Self-Regulation. I think the subtitle is Why Relationships Are Foundational in Some Way. I don't remember, but basically the title is Connection Precedes Learning and Self-Regulation, and that is the basic premise of that is that before self-regulation comes co-regulation, and we're talking so much about self-regulation, but what's missed is co-regulation, and that's such a big mistake to not see it in that order. We bypass the relational aspect, so vital to child learning and development.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up because, so like Corey was saying, we started to our numbers were coming in faster than what we could keep up with. And in New Mexico, there is a shortage of teachers. There's a shortage of speech therapists, occupational therapists, and the list goes on. And so part of the problem that we've been having is as our numbers go up, the length of time that children are needing our services have increased too. And we know that part of that is things that are happening at home, or I should say things that are not happening at home. And so Corey and I put our heads together and we developed this podcast to reach out to parents, to help inform them, to provide resources to them, and start, in a way, getting in their homes and starting to make a difference in that area. And we just, part of our Time to Chat movement too, is we just started doing group therapy, and our groups focus on mindfulness and meditation and the relationships and the social aspect of communication and social aspect of language learning, and of course everything else, and play. So that's where we're at, and that's why your article was like, oh my gosh, we need to talk to this guy.
Yeah. And tell me, what is it that you feel is missing at home that you think is vital, that you're trying to bring awareness to?
Connection, play, spending time with your child, putting the devices away, having conversations at dinner or any other time, true connection. Mm-hmm. And what we see it, and it's not, yes, we work with children and that's why we're focusing on this too, but that same issue is prevalent within the parents and their social relationships as well. And so the children are watching this and seeing this and learning, or shall I say, not learning how to build relationships or have connection. It's not modeled for them, nor is it something that they engage in with their parents as often anymore.
Yeah, it's a massive systemic problem. It's huge. It's huge, and I don't think, and I know you do, but we don't get how deeply systemic and old this issue is. And I think a huge part of it is because we've lost touch with our traditional roots. In terms of, to me, the wisdom of and traditions of hunter-gatherer societies and living in community and being close to elders and an extended network of community. There's, for instance, in certain indigenous cultures, it's the aunts and the uncles that are actually the disciplinarians of the children, not the parents, so the parents can maintain the as best they can a secure attachment.
Wow.
And so to me, like we're just waking up to attachment theory, and we are waking up to the deeply sad historic roots of our education system, to me, which perpetuate this problem, and just the overall disconnect to the land. So it's a hugely systemic problem, and in my opinion, this idea that mental illness is on the rise, I actually think is potentially incorrect, because historically we've we've had plenty of anxiety and depression. It's just that we're becoming more aware of it now, or it's starting to peak, just like the climate is. So, yeah. Anyway.
So
on that topic, I can go on a diatribe, so you'll have to stop me sometimes.
No, it's okay. We probably both can do that along with you.
Yeah. So just to back up a little bit, you are a counselor, is that correct?
Yeah, I wear many hats. I'm a registered therapeutic counselor, and it's a trauma-based counselor, and it's also somatic counseling. So it's a very body-oriented approach, partly because we recognize that so much of trauma is pre-verbal, so we want to be able to use the body a lot. I'm also do a lot of breath work with clients, and I do ceremonial work with plant medicine. And I also do a lot of distant healing, where I can work with groups of up to 8 people at a time to support them in their healing journey. And that's a whole different topic. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit? I read that you do a lot of somatic work. Can you talk a little bit about what you were just saying? Trauma's pre-verbal.
Well, okay. So we know now that trauma is passed down epigenetically.
Okay.
And we also, research has shown that memories go back as 14 generations. So we know that trauma is passed down through the lineage, and what's not processed, we potentially inherit. In other words, what's not healed, we inherit.
Okay.
Inherit epigenetically. So that's one level of pre-verbal trauma. Another level of pre-verbal trauma is the stresses incurred in utero. So what is the mother's well-being like? What are her relationships like? What is she consuming? These all impact the growing child. And then there's the trauma incurred at the age of, say, 3 months, pre-verbally. What happened then? And when I say trauma, it's not necessarily developmental trauma. It's not necessarily a psychological trauma, such as abuse or neglect. It could be shock trauma. It could be the child at 3 months old falling off of the bed and landing on the floor. So all these things are stored in the nervous system, in the biophysiology, and so talk therapy is beautiful. It's needed. It's just that we can only do so much with talk when addressing a pre-verbal imprint.
Wow.
So this, I hear that, and I'm thinking about the article. Talk therapy maybe or possibly uses that left brain, that outcome. You talk about it, you get an outcome. Hopefully you feel better about it, but the things that you're talking about, using the body, using breath work and all of that, is also incorporating right brain?
Well, the way I was trained was to look at the somatic approach, and to healing in general is a very right brain to right brain approach. So we want to have the client, it's less about understanding it. Although understanding what happened, it's not necessary that someone understand what happened to be able to create it. They don't need to have a timeline of what happened, which is the left brain function. But what they need to do is to have an awareness in the body such that they can uncover these trapped imprints and have them move through their system without necessarily knowing the roots of that imprint. Because that imprint may be 3 generations ago. Now, there was a study, and I honestly cannot quote it, so forgive me, but there was a mouse, a female mouse, and what they did is they gave her the smell of a rose. Now, they kept presenting this rose to her over time, but then what they did is every time she smelled the rose, they shocked her. So then what happened is so they kept shocking her when the rose was presented, and so there began to become a physiological reaction associated with the smell of the rose naturally, even when the shock wasn't presented. So she had a baby, that baby had a baby, that baby had a baby, and that baby had a baby. So 5 generations down, they presented the rose, and the mouse had the same physiological reaction. Now, just to make sure I do give some credit, I believe that study comes from a book called It Didn't Start With You, which is an excellent book that provides plenty of research on intergenerational trauma. But the point is this, and I educate my clients on this, is that it didn't necessarily start with them. And that's why a body-based approach incorporates the mystery of healing, which is we don't necessarily know. So that's one element of right brain to right brain, but I won't go much further than that at the moment. Yeah.
No, that was great.
Can you, I think most people more or less understand that right brain is a little bit more creative side, left brain more analytical language. Can you, maybe for people who don't know much about that, just kind of talk a little bit more about right brain in particular?
Well, a very simple way to differentiate them is there's the measurable and the immeasurable. So the way I look at it is the left brain is more interested in the measurable, and the right brain is more interested in the immeasurable. So, or unquantifiable. So when we look at a small child, they dwell in the immeasurable. There's really nothing quite we can say that's quite quantifiable about them unless you're counting how many diapers they use or how many times they spit out their food. So we're talking about them living in a deep state of presence and attunement to their surroundings.
Right.
They're awake, aware, connected. Now, you can't measure any of that. You can't measure awakeness, awareness, attunement. Maybe you can if with some high-level sophisticated technology that measures the brain, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the basic nuances of living and life that exude from a child. So they have that quality. They have that quality to stare in your eyes that is just beautiful, and it's a state of wonder. Now, again, you can't quantify wonder. They feel deeply. They absorb deeply. They emote deeply. They emote in an unbridled way. Okay, so these are all, again, the unquantifiable. These are the domains of the right brain, but I will say it's also the domain of just the feeling, breathing, body, and the spirit that infuses the body and the heart, which is the brain in its own right.
Yes.
And from Heart Math Institute, we know it emits the largest electromagnetic field of all the organs, including the brain. So now, the right brain develops first we've measured this based on blood flow. Not we, but people have measured it based on blood circulation. There's more blood circulation going on in the right hemisphere. But as the child gets older, the left brain starts to have more circulation in it. It starts to develop more, and then there becomes more of a balance. Now, the left brain is the more, it's kind of the busy bee, it's the organizer, the quantifier, it's the part that plans, organizes, categorizes. It's kind of like the adult brain, it's the parent that says, have you done this yet? Did you do your homework? It takes care of the to-dos. We need the left brain. And if you're going to dial a phone number, even though people don't dial phone numbers anymore,
Right.
dial a phone number, you're not going to be able to take those numbers, put them in sequence, dial them in sequence. You need the left brain to do that. So it's the time space part of the brain. It's this number goes and this number goes and this number goes as a sequence, as a time. So that's another way of looking at it, is the right brain dwells in no time, the left brain dwells in time. And so that's kind of a general, I can go on if you want.
No, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And it sounds like to me from your article, and certainly, based on what we see, is that parents in general, most people, we live heavily in that left brain world, and we expect maybe too much left brainness out of our children. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. And so there's a study. It showed that children in elementary school who are the most creative garner the least amount of favoritism from their school teacher. I'll say it again. Children who are the most creative in elementary school garner the least amount of favoritism from their school teacher. So to me, that's sort of simply as a simple way of answering your question.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
I do too.
It's a simple way of answering your question. And so basically, children are groomed at a young age to lose their innocence and fit in. Mm-hmm. They're groomed at a young age basically to leave the right brain, to become quite, quote unquote, successful in the left brain. Now, there's a mythic journey aspect to this. If we look at our mythical stories, so you look at Harry Potter, for instance. Have you read Harry Potter or know of Harry Potter?
It's funny you should bring that up. We just dressed up as Harry and Hermione last week for Halloween for the kids. So
well, you kind of look like Daniel Radcliffe, actually. Older Daniel Radcliffe. So to me, Hogwarts represents the right brain, symbolically. And everywhere else where the Muggles are, that represents the left brain.
Wow.
And so platform 9 3/4 is kind of the corpus callosum. It's the part of the brain that separates the left and the right.
Right.
But we can look at these mythical tales such as Alice in Wonderland. The rabbit hole is the corpus callosum. We look at the tornado in Wizard of Oz. That's the corpus callosum. The Lion, the Witch, and the wardrobe is the corpus callosum. So we're moving from left brain to right brain in those stories, but eventually they have to come back to the left brain because they take the gifts of the right brain that they learn in the right brain, the wisdom, the skills, the newfound awareness, the courage, and they have to bring it back to do something with it. And it's Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So children are born in the right brain, but they have to leave it. They have to leave it. They have to lose themselves in a way. And then they have to go on this mythic journey of trying to find that mythic quality again that the right brain connects them to, which is their immeasurable spirit. But the problem is in the society, we don't have any elders. Sorry, that sounds like a black and white statement. We're bereft of elders. And there's certainly no initiation. In traditional cultures, there's an initiation at age 13 where it's like, we're going to bring you back into the mythic world. We're going to put you through a rite of passage to connect you to your mythic self so that you can then essentially go from youth to adult and then be able to bring those gifts and capacities back to the village so you can use them. So, but the school system was traditionally designed not to support creativity, not to nurture the mythic self, but to actually sculpt children, mold them to manufacture them into little workers.
Yeah.
So they could feed the growing economy, the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s, and become obedient citizens that feed the growing economy. So the school system was designed in large part to ultimately pump more money into the people who run the economy. Now, if we add the fact that Protestant correctional institutions, if we go even before that, were designed to break the will of children, because the will is related to the word wild. So we don't want wild children, because a wild children is a willful children, and a willful children is harder to control. So we need to control the child so that the child doesn't go to hell, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And so we will do whatever it takes to break their will, including severe forms of abuse. Then we can add the colonial aspect of the residential schools and how the pure genocide that occurred there, and just the brutality of what we called education at the time. So we take those three trauma imprints on a societal level, and we add the fact that we have this very industry-based society that's disconnected from the land and from elders and from rites of passage. You're going to have a left brain dominant world that's disconnected from the mythic self. And so because we don't know that, we parent and educate children to fit into that matrix.
Yep.
To fit into that matrix. And that is why in so many examples when and we see this with, say, Janis Joplin or John Cleese, where they wanted to do something different. They wanted to be an artist. They wanted to be an actor, a singer. And the parent goes, "Why can't you just get a job, a simple job at the become an accountant?" We don't like them breaking rules and living their own life. So they fit in, and it makes everyone, quote unquote, happy.
Yeah.
My long answer to your question, but it sort of summarizes it for me.
Well, and one thing that we've been talking about, it fits right in, is that, or that we're trying to explore and trying to get our parents to realize, is we come with the natural tools that we need, and children especially do, and so that the way that they exist and that they play, I think all too often is just looked at, oh, that's just playing, or they're not nothing is being accomplished when we're just sitting around talking to each other and playing. Nothing is being accomplished. And what we're trying to hopefully convey is that so much is being accomplished when you're talking and you're playing and you're imagining.
That's one of our goals of everything that we're setting up, is to show that, like he just said, children are learning and they're connecting, and there's so much that's going on during play. Our therapy is all play-based, and so everything we do involves play, involves connection. Very rarely do the children we work with sit at tables and drill speech sounds. They're doing it through play, but often we do have parents, sometimes even interns, that have come in and they what about the outcomes? What's happening? This just looks like play. And so we're really trying to raise that awareness of what can be done during play when children are just in that natural state of really, encouraging their right brain and having fun and being creative.
So when a parent comes in and essentially says, "What is my Johnny done today?" what she's basically saying is, "I want to see something measurable." Now, who is saying that? It's the left brain that's saying that.
Yes.
And another way of saying that, it's a parent that's disconnected from her right brain, and to be quite frank with you, disconnected from her or his body, disembodied. Yep. And that comes most likely, I can say with confidence, from trauma. From an unhealed body. So, which is a whole different avenue we can go down. But so that's the problem, is that parent is seeing through the lens of the left brain. And so that parent is looking for signs for markers that'll make her or his left brain satisfied.
Yeah.
It's a saying that a parent tells a child to put on a coat so the parent feels warm.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
So a question I ask my participants who are in my play shops and keynotes is, I say a question that could be one of the most important questions you ask yourself is, who is this for? When I need my Johnny to achieve a certain result, is it for Johnny or me?
Yeah.
Super important. If parents get that, let alone all people, we'd have a much more conscious world, and we'd stop projecting our stuff onto others, onto children in this case.
Yeah.
And you brought up your workshops.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about those? And I'm assuming that your workshops are to help people get more in touch with right-brained living?
Yeah, and I have to also be careful that I don't come across as saying the left brain is Darth Vader and
right
brain is Luke Skywalker. So I make those clear in my play shops, and I call them play shops because, to me, work is a symbol of an imbalanced brain. We're turning children into little workers. So that's because we're balanced towards the left brain, which is much more interested in tasks and to-do lists. So I call them play shops, and I lead a whole bunch of types of play shops. So Remembering to Play is probably the one I'm most known for, and I've led the most times. But I also do play shops on intuition, which would probably be the topic I've led second most. And the intuitive focus of that is to A, connect to your own intuition, and B, to recognize that children are naturally intuitive. They're born deeply intuitive. In fact, I would go beyond that and say it's actually instinct, which I actually think is slightly higher level than intuition. And then I lead play shops on communication and leadership as well. And a communication topic, for instance, would be on empathy and how to be empathetic. And I provide research and stories on how an empathetic approach really has a massive impact on improving the child well-being. But to the point of remembering to play, which is the most common topic, yeah, absolutely. It's about helping people connect to their heart, to their childlike innocence, and thus their right brain, to help them have faith that they don't need to control the child's existence as much if you allow play to do the quote unquote work. One of the things I say is that if we trust the intelligence of play, we don't have to control a child as much. We can step back, because play will do the job. If you look at a child playing with blocks, just blocks alone, how many different things is a child learning just through blocks?
Yep.
Asymmetry, balance, cause and effect. There's so many. There's like 50 things. And I mean that literally. So that's just blocks. What if they go to drawing? Or what if they go to their baking set, or playing with mud, or any form of loose parts, or whatever? We control children because we were controlled ourselves.
Yeah.
Education, the etymology of education comes from the Latin educare, which means to draw out. And that's really important. Now, I've spoken to thousands and thousands of early childhood educators, K to 12. I work mostly with teachers of younger children, and I say, who here knows the etymology of education? Out of thousands and thousands I've spoken to, I've had probably 3.
Wow.
What's the impact on the education system if we don't even know its etymological roots?
Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't know.
Yeah. So education, though, begins, in my opinion, with how we see a child. Do we see a child as an empty vessel that we need to pump full of information? Or do we see a child as a vessel full of love, light, wisdom, gifts that is longing to be expressed in the world? So suddenly we have a whole different way of relating to a child and educating a child, such that we respect their immanence. We respect that they have a soul that's longing to be expressed. And therefore we become like a poem I recently wrote, like banks of a wild river. We are banks, but we're allowing the river to run wild. And we're not getting in the way as much. And play really is the medicine, so to speak, that allows that river to move freely and allows the child to stay connected to their fluid nature, which is a healthy nature.
Can you talk about what you see the adult's role in playing with the child? Obviously, a child will do what they want to do. What do you see an adult role as?
I think that to be very realistic, some kids definitely need an adult to say, "Hey, let's." Sometimes kids need that. They need a parent to say, "Hey, let's play this game. Let's stack these blocks and get this ball and play bowling." And kids sometimes need that. In my opinion, the more technologically oriented a child is, or the less connected they are to nature, or the more sedentary that child's life has become, a parent may need to initiate harder to say, "Hey, let's."
Yes.
Yeah, we experienced that.
Absolutely.
But when a parent is exhausted, stressed, without enough support in terms of a partner or extended family, or sick, or has mental illness, then that's less likely to happen. So that's a sort of a realistic side of things. On the other side, I feel that parents' job is to give lots of space to the child. There was a study, there's an article called, it was New York Times, it was Grant, I can't remember his last name, but it was Want to Raise a Creative Child? Step 1, back off. And in the article, there was a study that showed that they compared children who were highly creative as compared to children who had sort of average levels of creativity. And the children who were the most creative had 1/6 the amount of rules and structures. So if parent backs off a bit and allows allows space, and the teacher backs off, it's incredible what can emerge. And, and like I said, there's a place to step in. So it's a fine line, and, but generally it's trusting the child will find something to play with, and that means trusting moments of boredom as well. Like, we don't have to steal their moments of boredom. Out of boredom can come great amounts of creativity. So, but trust play, and I also want to say, I think an adult's job is also to expose the child to many different things, or to take them into nature, present an instrument to them, show them, read many types of books to them, expose them, and see what sparks fly. But don't expect or be attached to sparks flying in a certain area.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a book called Let the Fire Burn, Nurturing the Creative Spirit of Children, and it's one of the things I really emphasize is to expose them to many things that will make their fire spark, but don't have an agenda like gymnastics. She needs to do gymnastics because I did gymnastics. Well, that's not where her fire is burning.
Yeah, so it's not about the outcome. It's not about what they're learning. It's about the process more than the outcome, correct?
Yeah, it's about what we say is it's process over product.
Right.
Okay.
And like you said, it's also not about what we want them to get out of it. It's us taking a step back and watching to see what magic happens, just letting them figure it out on their own or explore it on their own. Again, like, if we trust process, then we need to be connected to our right brain, because that's what the right brain is about. It's about process. Product is a left brain function. So one of the reasons why we are more interested in product over process in our society is because we're left brain dominant. And one of the reasons we distrust play is because we're left brain dominant. But play, in its purest sense, is about process, not product.
Absolutely.
A child will happily tell you that they want to become an astronaut, but the next day they'll tell you they want to be a fireman or a firewoman. So they're not attached to outcomes or products. They're still in process. So they're going to move fluidly from one thing to another. They're going to move from one loose part to another loose part, one idea to another idea. They're not as attached. But the moment you take that child and you expect certain outcomes when they're still in their formative years of 0 to 7 and very much right brain dominant, then what you're doing is you're imposing a product-oriented approach on a fluid system that's more process-oriented. And that, to me, is a deep harm to the growing child. We need to let them stay in that fluid state, and play supports that. That's the key, especially unstructured play. Ideally, if there can be plenty of unsupervised play, ideally play where they're in wide open spaces in nature, exploring, free. They can use their whole body. They don't have to always be outside, but that's the key. Play keeps them in touch with the fluid process state.
Can you, sorry.
No, you go.
Possibly, can you give us maybe an idea of what a child would look like whose left brain is being nurtured, I guess, more than the right brain, or and maybe, I guess what I'm getting at with this is how devices are playing a role in that, because I do know that some parents hand the child an iPad and say they're playing a game on the iPad or watching a movie or something like that, and to the parent that's considered play. However, the play that you're talking about, wide open spaces, unstructured, using their imagination, using their body, is very different. And so what kinds of things would we see from children who are predominantly getting the kind of play that involves devices or watching TV, and not moving, not out, not using their imagination?
So what was the question? What do we expect to see from them?
What might we see? What might that child look like in comparison to a child who is allowed to have the freedom? Like what might be some of the behaviors that we see from children who aren't getting that right brain
Right. Well,
input?
you might be going slightly outside the bounds of my expertise with that one, given I don't work with children. But I will say this. I strongly support parents who have very strong boundaries around technology.
Okay.
And I would highly recommend keep video games away from them as long as possible. I think, there's something called direct attention fatigue, and it's from staring too much in a focused area, right? So if you have a child who's the right brain creates a vast like lantern awareness. So there's lantern awareness and then there's flashlight awareness. Okay, so children with the right brain dominance have a lantern awareness, if that makes sense. Yeah. So if you take what's naturally a lantern awareness and impose things on the child or give experiences with the child that moves them to a flashlight awareness, then what happens is that children are going to start to get something called direct attention fatigue, or they'll get something in China which is diagnosed as myopia. I think it's called myopia.
I've heard
Hence
of that.
myopic. So it's too much of a strain on the child's attention and on their eyes to stay focused to that degree when they're naturally wide open. The same with literacy. If you teach, to me, a child learns to read when they're ready. That's the time to learn to read. Let's not have an agenda on when we think they should read. But if you think about it, the right brain is not really interested in specifics and details. But if you get a child and you're getting her to read along lines after line after line, when her brain isn't ready, then that's another way to move her from lantern to spotlight focus. Now, to me, it's hard on the developing brain and hard on the developing nervous system. That's why we know from research, and there's so much research to show that children thrive in wide open spaces. They thrive in nature. They thrive in unstructured play more than structured play because they are able to stay in that lantern focus. And so technology narrows that focus. It keeps them staring at an intensely lit screen when their eyes should be wide open looking around. So I think and part of it is I think it's too early to know what the impact of the technological revolution is on children and the iPhone revolution on children. But yeah, so it's early days, but that's my general opinion on that. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, complete. That was perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your article as well that trying to teach them more left brain things like numbers, letters, reading at an early age can actually have an adverse effect. I think you said something about learned stupidity because, I don't know, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, if we're teaching a child ABC in 1, 2, 3, when she is, I'll just say she for simplicity, when she's right brain dominant and generally not interested in it, then we're going to force her to do something that she is just generally either not interested or not able to do. So now, if we test her, grade her, assess her, rank her, report her, then what's going to happen is that she's going to, at some level, potentially feel like she's stupid.
Yeah.
Especially if you add the comparison factor, which happens in school systems. Or you could be at home, you compare her to her sister or brother.
Yep.
So then what happens, she's going to learn she's stupid. And it's not that she's stupid, she's obviously just not ready. or willing or interested. So this is a significant problem, in my opinion, in our societies, is that we are teaching developmentally inappropriate curriculum. This is why the Finnish school system has been revered increasingly, because they bring a play-based approach from what I believe is 0 to 7, the formative years. By the way, I think it's interesting that we've called 0 to 7 the formative years, and that's also aligns with the brain development. So, yeah, so it becomes learned stupidity. You know, another way of saying this is the more we push and promote those things that can be measured on children, the more they grow up feeling like they don't measure up.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
And the more that they are probably showing signs of behavior problems and becoming the quote unquote problem child at school, because that we do see some children who are kind of fighting that. You know, they're right brained, they want to play, they want to use their imagination, and sometimes those children who come to us for therapy after they've been at school all day, you can just see they're worn out. And that's probably the child that's been told a million times in one day, and trying to push them into that mold. So
yeah, I'm just going to turn on this light here while you guys are talking, because the darkness is setting in.
It sure
there
is.
you go. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to be careful that we don't confuse a defiant child who has some oppositional defiant disorder, quote unquote, which is a whole different topic, is the DSM, versus a child who's fighting for his right to exist in his right brain, in his heart. Right? So it's like, what happens, the child is fighting for his right to be a child, and then we punish that child.
Yep.
And then we label that child with a disorder, and then we give that child Prozac.
Yep.
Or Ritalin, sorry. So, you know.
Yeah.
It's,
or other therapies.
or other therapies.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, are the parents saying, wait a second, or the teacher saying, wait a second, particularly the parents, how is this child acting out something that I am afraid to look at in myself? And that's a whole different topic, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a systemic, we have a culture that has systemically suppressed the innocence in the right brain. We've suppressed imagination, because a person that grows up with an imagination who's creative is harder to control.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we want people to fit in. We want people to comply, to conform, to be obedient, to not question. And the school system was designed for that.
Yeah.
And we're all bought in, except for those who are waking up.
Yeah.
So the school system has a massive change that it has to make if it's going to wake up. But it will need to crumble in very beautifully devastating ways.
I think you're right.
Yeah. We agree.
Yeah. And parents need to also to wake up to what's happening, so that they are not not parenting their kids to fit in, to fit into this conformist consensus culture. But to do that, they need to do their healing. What's very fascinating, one of the coolest things I learned recently, is that the word trauma comes from the old German word Trum, T-R-U-M, and Trum means dream. So when we heal our trauma, we wake from the dream.
Wow.
And the dream has been the dream that I've just laid out, in part, the dream of fitting in, the dream of how we've historically had a culture that has been conditioned to comply, to basically become automatons. And so we heal our trauma, we wake up for that. We wake up from that, and as we heal, we are much less likely to parent from that dominant culture mindset. And so we are more likely to let our children be wild and free, and potentially we may even want to homeschool them.
Well, I think that's a growing, that's a very popular thing.
Yeah.
There was a time, I have three kids. There was a time, I would have laughed at that notion of homeschooling, and now I think about it seriously all the time. Yeah.
It's a huge topic. It's a huge topic.
Do you, and we'll let you go here, I am curious, your play shops, is that what you said?
Play shops, yeah.
Play shops. I find that interesting, just the little bit that I've seen. I think probably all adults across forever probably could have used something like that. But in particular now, you were talking a little bit earlier about how everybody's overwhelmed, and especially parents. Do you think is part of the design of these workshops to get parents, I don't know, to be more energized, more willing to not just play with their kids, but I don't know, tell us a little bit more about your goals for those.
Remembering to play, first and foremost, it needs to be noted that it's not called learning to play, it's called remembering to play.
Yeah.
We all know how to play on some level, we've just forgotten. Mm-hmm. And we've forgotten for the many reasons I've listed in this conversation. So it's called remembering to play. My number one goal in remembering to play is for the adults I'm in this play shop with, for them to reconnect to their spirit. And so remembering to play means remember your spirit. So okay. If they can remember their spirit, and in particular their childlike spirit, if they can remember what it means to be a child and what it feels like to be a child, then they're more likely to remember the importance of play. Yep. If they remember the importance of play and feel their childlike spirit, they're more likely to respect play as a vital force in a child's life. And therefore they're less likely to try to shape a child, but to instead allow the child to be shaped by play. And so that's kind of the main goal, is for them to move through this process of it. It's a very experiential, it's a play shop. There's no tables. We sit in a horseshoe. There's tons and tons of games, activities. Some go deeper than others. And usually there's some emotion at some point. Some grief comes up, because as they connect to their inner child and their childhood and each other, they connect to the wound of having lost that.
Wow.
So as they connect to the feeling of play and the feeling of freedom that comes through play, there's a corresponding wound. There's in my work and with clients in my therapeutic practice, we say with the longing co-arises with the wound. So, for instance, as I connect to the longing to become more relaxed in my life, I suddenly feel the wound of guilt that says you shouldn't allow yourself to relax for a moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As I connect to the longing to have my first art display at a gallery, I connect to the wound that says you can't do that and everyone's going to hate your art. So in my play shop, the wound of play and the wound of loss of innocence co-arises, and that's something that then must be felt through. And then suddenly, if they can feel that and have empathy for it, then suddenly they're going to have more empathy for the child, their own child who wants to play.
Yeah.
And going to have more internal conflict with the teacher who wants to take play away, or their partner who doesn't respect play.
Yeah.
the best feedback I can get, and this always makes me a bit emotional when I think about it, or when it happens, is at the end of the play shop, they say, you know what, I just want to go home and hug my kid. And that's the most important thing I want to hear from them. It's just that they go home, and because of what happened, they love their child more, and they love playing more. So, I don't teach play. I educare play. I draw it out, and we use the experiential activities to have them connect to it, and also to learn practical tools that supports them to better connect to their children. So there you go. That's it in a nutshell.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to say to our listeners, mostly parents of young children? Anything you want to plug?
I'll plug. I don't mind plugging.
Yeah.
So I have 2 books. One's called Let the Fire Burn, Nurturing the Creative Spirit of Children. And another one's called Wild Empty Spaces, Poems for the Opening Heart. Both are on Amazon. But in truth, I don't need more money. I'm fine. I make enough money. So I say that to you just, if you may find the book inspiring. Yes. But my website is a virtual database of articles. And there's 2 articles that I will recommend people read. Apart from The Right Brain Develops First. One is called Remembering the Soulfulness of Play. Remembering the Soulfulness of Play. Trusting the Intelligence of Play to Raise a Child is the subtitle.
We'll link to that one specifically then.
We will print out and hand out that article to our parents.
Yeah.
I have no problem.
The second one is called Connection Precedes Learning, the one I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing I really recommend people do is look at a video I have on my YouTube channel called Come Out and Play, Embracing Life's Infinite Playground. I highly recommend people watch that. One of the great myths is that I ask my participants, I say, what's the number one thing that gets in the way of you playing? And they always, I don't want to say always, most of the time they say time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I use this video to basically challenge that myth and say you actually don't need time to play.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now I could just go like that to you,
Yep.
and put my hands on my ears for people who may not be, or make a funny face,
Yep.
and now that takes a second. You don't need time. You just need to take the risk of the vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
the courage, the will to be playful every moment. Playing is a state of being. Everywhere I go, I'm being. I don't need to get somewhere to be. It's already in me. So I bring play wherever I go.
Yeah.
So the last thing I'll say, please watch that video. It's inspiring. And then the last thing I'll say is this, and this is to me like the most important thing. I ask people at the end of my talks, I say, name one thing in the natural world that's linear. I say, name one thing in the natural world that's linear. Now remember, the left brain loves linearity.
Mm-hmm.
And we need linearity. I'm glad we have linearity. It's part of the human experience. But what is one thing in the natural world, that is above and beyond, any human creation that is linear? And the truth is nothing is linear. Nothing is linear. So then I say to my participants, I say, okay, so when you look at children, children don't move in a straight line. They don't think in a straight line. They don't dream, act. They're very non-linear. When they move, they're doing cartwheels and twists and turns and spirals and circling. They're bouncing up and down all over the place. They're squirming in their chairs. Okay, so if we remember that the non-linear nature of life that we is connected through the right brain. Now the right brain is primary in our development. So in other words, the non-linear nature is primary.
Yep.
So if you take, and so it's been said that children are closest to God. You could say children are closest to the creative impulse of life. They're closest to the non-linear, immeasurable, mysterious nature of life. So if we take that part as well and understand they're actually so deeply connected to that, then we need to be very careful in how we raise them, how we educate them, that we don't remove them from that. They're pure expressions of that, and play is meant to keep them connected to that, and it's there to help them express themselves through in that fluid state, so that they continuously feel it in their system. Play keeps them entrained with, connected to, expressing from, in endless ways, that fluid, mysterious state. So if we can just remember that, and we remember the science that the right brain develops first, then we will have a higher respect for play and the role of play in child learning and development. And we'll have a higher respect for childhood, period.
Period.
Yes.
Yes.
That's my last word for you.
I think that's a perfect way to end things. That's really, really wonderful.
Thanks again, folks, for listening, and a big, huge thank you for Vince for making the time to chat with us. We hope that you all found it as interesting and as helpful as we did. Make sure to head over to our website, timetochat.org, to learn more about Vince and more about our program, Time to Chat. Thanks again, folks. Until next time.